Thank you very much, Professor Zhang, for this very kind introduction. And I shall start with a disclaimer. Recently, all the topics concerning Chinese political culture, Chinese traditional culture, unfortunately became very much politicized, both in China and in the Western Academy. So please, I am not going to describe, to serve the party line or to undermine the party line. I am much more interested in this talk in what happened in the centuries before the imperial unification. Of course, there are for sure some political implications for today, but let us wait until Q&A. I am not going to address, and it is not important for me actually, how my findings can be utilized or not utilized for current political affairs. So let us start now with a sentence which is very well known to by everybody who works on China. The most famous Chinese political novel, The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, it starts with this statement. They say that the great forces of all under heaven, after prolonged division, must unify, and after prolonged unity, must divide. Now, for 99% of Chinese, it is almost self-evident. It is so easy, so everybody knows it from the childhood, from starting reading this romance. Now, think about it from a comparative perspective. Yes, after prolonged unity must divide. We know it. All the great empires in the world, fragmented, disintegrated, the Roman Empire, the Arab Caliphate, the greatest empire in the history of the humankind, the Mongol Empire, disintegrated once and for all. But when I ask you, after prolonged division must unify, where did you find this kind of renewed unity? And this is the question which I am going to ask. So before I start answering this question, I want to make a very short comparative detour to show a potential of looking at China comparatively. As Professor Zhang had kindly mentioned, I am working now in this collaborative project of, we call it comparative imperiology. We compare different empires worldwide. And we divided, it's a group, a team of scholars from Europe, from United States, and from Israel as well. So we have divided the Eurasian continent into 5 great macro regions: Europe, Middle East, India, China, and of course the steppe, which is very important and unfortunately very often forgotten as a major civilizational center. These 5 macro regions have their own peculiar imperial civilization. Now, without entering details, because of course it is impossible in this very short framework, very schematic presentation of what all this about. So we have these 5 regions, in which of them we can find 3 waves of empire formation. The first wave, starting in the Middle East already in the first half of the first millennium BCE, but in all rest of the regions only in the second half, in the last third of the first millennium BCE, we have the first great world empire, the Achaemenid Empire, and then we have its offshoots, the Hellenistic empires and the Maurya Empire in India, and of course the Roman Empire in Europe, and parallel, unrelated to it, the formation of the empires almost simultaneously in China and in the steppe, Qin Han and the Xiongnu. Now, all these empires enter their crisis, some of them very soon, some of them quite late, but by the 3rd century CE, very few major empires survive on the world map. However, by about 6th century CE, we have a new wave of empire building, and some of the greatest empire in human history, the Tang Empire in China, and the Arab Caliphate, which is amazingly successful. Just think about the Umayyad Caliphate from Spain to Uzbekistan. You have the single political entity, and the Turk, the Göktürk Hakanat, the greatest empire of the steppe until then. All these empires enter another crisis in the 9th century, usually disintegrate. There are lesser empires, smaller empires, and then suddenly we have this meta-empire, the Mongol Empire, the best of the best, really the apex of empire building, in the world, and the new wave, post-Mongol wave in most of the regions, not all of them, but most of them. Very easy, very simplistic. Why I'm talking about this? Look at this slide again, and just look now. And I'm playing with this. We can speak about many different empires in China, but we also can speak about one Chinese empire with periodic fragmentations and disintegrations, but still the single Chinese empire from the Qin unification in 221 BCE until the collapse of the imperial order in the beginning of the 20th century. And this is unparalleled. Now you will immediately say, you are playing with words, because some of the scholars who work on imperial formations worldwide, they know there is a concept of translatio imperi. You have translation of empires, if you want, like you have in Europe. You have the Roman Empire, and then you have the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and of course you have the Carolingians, and you have the Holy Roman Empire. So there is Rome, and of course you are living, most of you, in the United States, which to a certain extent considers itself also the heir of the Roman Republic or Empire. Debate which I'm not going to enter. But, ladies and gentlemen, we do have resurrections of empires in different parts of the world. However, whenever you go to these empires and you see how much are they related to predecessors, you will see that they are very much different. The Holy Roman Empire, in terms of its structure, in terms of its political mode of functioning, in terms of its ideology, in whatever terms you want, was so much different from the great Roman Empire that, speaking of real continuity, would be really a great leap of faith. The Arab Caliphate was established accidentally almost on the same territory that the great Achaemenid Empire a 1,000 years ago, but very few Arabs knew or thought at all that they are somehow reenacting the great success of the Achaemenid kings of Darius the First, etc., etc., etc. In China, it is different. In China, we have not just continuity of symbols. Continuity of symbols we have anywhere in the world. But in China, we have continuity in terms of the administrative system, continuity in terms of the written language, continuity in terms of curriculum. From the Han Dynasty to the end of the imperial period, we have the same foundational texts which every man of letters is supposed to know. We have much more. We have the continuity of ideology. And I would say that we have huge changes. We have economic changes, social changes, ethnic changes, religious changes, but still we have very pronounced continuities which we don't have anywhere. And just to end this short digression, think about this, that if a Chinese magistrate of the Han Dynasty will fall asleep and get awakened after 15 centuries under the Ming Dynasty, and he will undergo some training, and I think that in 2-3 months he will be absolutely able to perform his tasks as a magistrate under the Ming Dynasty. Now think about the Roman senator, Roman magistrate, who is falling asleep and getting awake under the Holy Roman Empire, even under the Byzantine Empire of the 10th century. It will be completely different. He will not find where is he. And I think this justifies somehow, with all necessarily cautions, it justifies my speaking about Chinese empire as a continuous empire, despite periodic fragmentations, etc., etc., etc. Now, what is the reason for this durability? And this is the topic which I'm going to discuss today. There are two kinds of explanations, and I shall start with the explanations which I reject, but I want to explain why I reject them. These explanations are quite popular, and very oddly, they are now becoming more and more popular in China itself. A kind of China's predestination. We must have an empire. We must have unified empire. There is impossible to find any alternative. in history of China, why there is a very common explanation. Our territory somehow fitting our topography, our whatever fits to the empire building, and we have a single ethnicity. Now it is very common, the great Chinese nation, the Zhonghua Minzu. Nice, but I think it doesn't work. And I shall explain first why it doesn't work, and then I will go to my own explanation. Now, why it doesn't work? First of all, to speak about the Chinese territory is convenient for empire building. It was very popular theme in the 19th, even the early 20th century, when Europeans were traveling from Shanghai to Beijing, and then it is a great plain, and then you can indeed find that, yes, very easy to unify this territory. But come on, ladies and gentlemen, everybody who was in China even once knows that there is Sichuan, which is so ideally suited to become an independent kingdom. You just protect it. Very nice, very fertile area. Protect the mountain passes around Sichuan, and you have independence. And you have the same in Shanxi, and you have the same in Fujian, and you have the same in Guangzhou, etc., etc., etc. Territory does not explain Chinese imperial construction. It actually, in terms of territory, China is much tougher to create an empire than, for instance, Northern Europe. And in Northern Europe, you have very, very few imperial enterprises in European history, whereas in China, it is common. In Europe, it is very rare. North Africa, it's much easier to unify North Africa than to unify China. You see almost no mountains, all this huge territory, but in North Africa, it will be an exception. In China, it will be the rule. So it doesn't work. Actually, Chinese empire, if you want, it is much more tough. It is tougher than most empires in the world. Most empires were developing from east to the west because you have more or less the same climatic conditions, whereas China is the longest empire from north to south. So I even don't speak about Heilongjiang, I speak about Liaoning, which was normally, not always, but normally under the imperial control of China, and going to the south to northern Vietnam, Annan, which was part of China for 1,000 years, or to Hainan, etc. You have huge diversity. It is very tough, very difficult to maintain agricultural empire in which there are so different climatic conditions, so different agricultural conditions, and still it was unified. So the territory does not explain anything. There is a very popular another territorial explanation which is associated with Karl August Wittfogel. Actually, he was writing not far away from Rutgers University, but he had this idea, without entering his theory, that China somehow was very suited for hydraulic projects, and in order to make huge canals and huge dams, then you need a large, powerful state, and this state unifies everybody and causes everybody to work on canals. Sorry, nice story, based on Chinese mythology, surely, and many people in China accept it as if it is history. But we know archaeologically now that major hydraulic projects started with the Warring States period, even later in the early imperial period, much, much later than China entered its civilizational era. So it is not that Chinese civilization was created by hydraulic conditions. Chinese hydraulic works were the byproduct of the powerful state formation and not the precondition for this formation. One final explanation before I go to the real talk. Many people consider that China, yes, it's very easy to unify China, the single ethnicity. Poor Romans had to deal with the Germans and with the Jews and with Greeks and with Celtians and with Iberians and with whoever, whereas in China, everybody is Chinese, or so many people want to believe. I don't say that it is completely wrong. I just say when these people became Chinese and why they became Chinese. And I think for the American audience, it is easy to understand. Yes, we can say that there is an American people, but nobody, no sane person will say that this American people is somehow historical artifact from time immemorial. It is created by the states, by the state which is called United States of America. And I think there is very much about China, which is the same. Chinese population, I speak not about minorities, only about the so-called Han. Huge heterogeneity in terms of the mode of production of the food, of religion. There are gods which are so popular in Southeast China, completely unknown in inland areas. Mazu, the famous goddess of Guangzhou, Fujian, Taiwan, Hong Kong. She is completely unknown in Sichuan or in Gansu, for instance. And Chinese people were not always unified. You see here to the left of you, these great buildings, towers of the Hakka, Kedia, in Southeast China, very nice, part of the UNESCO World Heritage, but they were not built as part of World Heritage. They were built to protect the local people against another group of local people. Hakka were speaking a different dialect, but the different dialect became in the 19th century a very powerful way to create separate identities. And there were clashes, and dozens of thousands of people were killed in the clashes between Hakka and their neighbors, who were all Chinese, but spoke different dialects, if we define this as dialects. So, sorry, Chinese people were unified not because they are the same. Their dialects are mutually unintelligible. They are unified because they have the same state. And even if we say that there is some kind of unified Chinese culture from times immemorial, from the Neolithic period, yes, we have some kind of joint cultural traits. For instance, the usage of jade, which really very much distinguishes East Asian subcontinent, what we call now China, from most other parts of the world. Even if we accept this, sorry, unified culture does not create unified empire. The Arab world had an empire, the Caliphate, has unified culture, much more unified actually than China, with very strong unified religion, but there are 23 Arab states. The Greek world was surely culturally unified, but politically was completely fragmented until Macedonians imposed unified empire on the Greeks. And the Indian world, for most of the history, even when we had this Sanskrit Commonwealth, it was fragmented. So culture does not create an empire. Language does not create an empire. You need something else. Neither geography nor ethnicity can explain Chinese imperial success. Actually, should it be so easy, as some of my colleagues now say that, yes, China is predestined to be an empire. Sorry, why did it disintegrate so many times? It is not predestination. It is a choice. It is not a hardware explanation. It is political software. And I believe very much that to understand Chinese imperial durability, you need to look for ideology, for values, for dominant cultural orientations, which can create powerful realities on the ground. They cannot change everything, but they can change a lot. And I shall speak about one single example, and this example is the idea of the great unity, the Daitong idea, which made China into what it is today to a certain extent. My talk will be divided. Until now it was a lengthy introduction, but now we are going into the real thing, and my talk will be divided into 3 parts. I shall focus first of all on historical background, because so many people usually in China, but not only in China, they believe, okay, this Daitong, the great unity ideal, was a permanent feature of Chinese civilization from times immemorial. No, sorry, it was a product of certain historical circumstances. And these historical circumstances are what I am going to focus to show why this was a choice of the 4th, 3rd century BCE. Then I shall briefly outline this ideology of great unity and very briefly outline its realization under the Qin and its lasting impact for the next 22 centuries. Let us start. Now, I don't want to waste your time on Chinese history of early history, but shall start with this two very old Chinese political entities, the Shang and the Zhou. They're not empires, they are quasi-empires or proto-empires. They are powerful regional states which have these seeds of imperial formation. For instance, I will not speak about the Shang at all, but think about the Zhou, the idea of son of heaven. It was an exclusive appellation of Zhou kings. Nobody was calling himself son of heaven, the son of the supreme deity. Only the Zhou kings were. And we have some nascent idea of Tianxia, of all under heaven. We have the idea that we are the center of the world, but it does not make an empire. There was no idea that we need to integrate the entire real world. Zhou was not an inclusive polity. It was an exclusive, localized political entity with huge cultural prestige, absolutely unparalleled cultural prestige, but no more. It was like Egypt, like Babylonia, like Akkad even earlier, still not an empire, like early Assyrian Empire, not the late Assyrian, not the new Assyrian Empire, but the early avatar of the Assyrian Empire, a very powerful regional polity, but still not the real empire. So if you want, we shall discuss it during Q&A. I want to jump into the next period. The next period is very interesting. Very few people are dealing with it. Unfortunately, I hope very much that if there are doctoral students or future doctoral students in the audience, it is a very good period to work on it, because now we have a lot of new materials. The springs and autumns, the Chunxiu period, 8th to 5th century BCE. The son of heaven becomes completely meaningless, very, 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 very weak. Still very much prestige like the Pope, but not politically powerful personality. And actually we have the disintegration of the entire Zhou realm, and we have further disintegration within each of the state. And there are attempts, very interesting attempts, to create a viable multi-state order. It is the only time in Chinese history when people did not think at all about the unification. They thought how to create a viable multi-state system, and unfortunately, because we are now witnessing in our real world the disintegration of the viable multi-state system. No, I'm sorry, I'm Ukrainian by origins, so I feel very much this disintegration. In the springs and autumns period, this system did not function well. So we have war of all against all, permanent conflicts among different polities. However, what is interesting that despite these conflicts, despite this ongoing bloodshed, we have still very much of the uniform culture, which is not just in the center of the central plains, which are normally identified as the core of the Zhou world, but even in the periphery, when you look at the tombs, because it is very nice, we have now material evidence. Now, archaeologists, if there are archaeologists in the audience, they will immediately say, no, these bells are not the same. They're not the same, but they're very similar. They belong to the same cultural realm. They belong to the same civilization, if you want, and they come from different parts, including from Qin and Chu, the areas which are very often in the popular imagination are considered the outsiders of the Zhou world. Actually, the real outsiders back then, the southeastern states of Wu and Yue, today's Jiangsu, Zhejiang, even Shanghai if you want, but Shanghai was not meaningful. These areas became much more attracted to the Zhou culture. So we have political fragmentation, but cultural expansion a little bit, if you want, like we had in Europe after the collapse of the Roman Empire. The empire collapsed, but still the Latin, at least the Latin language expanded to the areas which were before not ruled by the Romans. But now let us go into the real history. And the real history starts here. We are in the Warring States period, and I believe very strongly that it is the single most interesting period in Chinese history, fascinating in terms of its dynamism, of dramas, and of course of its intellectual creativity, which is completely unparalleled. And we have now completely new political formations. We have territorially integrated states with strong bureaucracy, strongly centralized. We have economic revolution, we have military revolution, of which I will speak. we have something which very much reminds us about the European world in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. We have consolidated, powerful local territorial states, which are very strongly separated from neighboring states. Here on the map, those of you who distinguish colors, you can see that there are violet colors, which are the walls, the separating walls, which separate different political entities between themselves. And you can see the remnants of these walls, in this case of the states of Qin and Qi, are still very much visible on the ground. Now, walls create identities. Walls create us the feeling, we are the people here on our side on the wall, and people on the outside of the wall are not us. They're different. Maybe they're enemies. Actually, often they're enemies. If they were not enemies, we would not build a wall, because it is quite a huge investment of human force and material resources. So it is the beginning of the explanation. But the real thing which created separate identities were not just walls. It was something because of which walls were erected, and it was the permanent war of all against war. We are in the era which is named the Warring States period. And it was no longer the aristocratic combat of the preceding springs and autumns period, when there were chariots and people respected each other. It was a little bit like in the aristocratic Europe, when people fought but still respected very much the fighters from the opposite side. Now we have the crossbow, which changes completely the warfare. Now we can mobilize peasants, we can train them to shoot crossbow. You don't need to be as well trained as the chariot fighter. You can train any peasant to use crossbow, even people of my size, which is not size for the good Warring States period. And then you kill the enemies. And the more peasants you mobilize, the easier it will be to win the battle. So you need to reorganize the state, to mobilize everybody. Universal conscription, you need to make universal registration. You need to pay attention to everybody. You need to make everybody fight. And now we come to the core of the story. If everybody fights, the wars become much bloodier, much more devastating, much more targeting civilians, because you simply don't no longer need to distinguish the combatant and non-combatant population. Everybody is potentially a fighter. And think how they create identities. Think about the state of Qin, the northwestern state of Qin. You can be a peasant living in today's Baoji area, or in today's Xianyang area, or even in today's Chengdu in Sichuan, which was already part of the state of Qin in the 4th century BCE. Originally, you knew only the other peasants in your village and maybe a few people in the market town not far from you. Now, you are mobilized, officials come, conscript you, you go to the front, you serve together with peasants from different areas of your own country, and together you kill the enemies whom you never knew. You never knew your fellow soldiers. You never knew your enemies. They're enemies just because of one thing. They belong to the state of Chu, or the state of Zhao, or the state of Wei. You kill them. You kill their non-combatant population, because sometimes you're ordered to do so, and sometimes you like to do so. And then you feel camaraderie. You feel, my fellow soldiers are my brethren. You have identity. Blood creates identities. And read how much blood was shed back then. It is just a small extract from the records of the historian, the Shiji, and you see here just the numbers: cutting off 240,000 heads, resettling convicted criminals, expelling the residents. Convicted criminals were settled there. Another 150,000 heads are cut off. Another 50,000. And then the greatest battle of that era, the Changping massacre. After 3 years of the conflict, the entire surrendered army reportedly was massacred. Over 400,000 soldiers, most of the males of the state of Zhao. the males of the combat age. Now, some people doubt these numbers. I don't doubt them very much. Of course, they are exaggerated to a certain extent, but in the capital of the state of Yen, there was a very gruesome discovery of some 30,000 severed heads from the Warring States period, of all of them severed heads with the arrowheads in them. So yes, there were massacres of prisoners of war. But think now, the Qin armies come and kill and kill and kill. Do you think the state of Qin will become popular? Sorry. No more popular than, sorry for the colleagues, than Germany was in the Second World War. And we have here profound reinterpretation of what was Qin's identity. Before, in the springs and autumns period, Qin was a very normative, conservative state. You know, we can see from its material culture, from its writing, it was a part of the Zhou realm, and nobody was ever mentioning that it is a barbarous, a different state, that they are savages, that they are not like us. And then Qin became this great power. Professor Jiang had kindly mentioned Shang Yang, whose book attributed to him, I had translated, and his reforms actually turned Qin in this powerful war machine. And after his reforms, we suddenly have the explosion of hatred. They are barbarians. This is a state with tigers and wolves' heart, greedy, profit-seeking, and untrustworthy, which knows nothing of ritual propriety and virtuous behavior. They have a wolf's and jackal's heart. Their intention is to swallow everything. Look, Qin is the mortal enemy of all under heaven. See, the enemy of humankind. This is actually the terminology which we knew very well, unfortunately, during the Second World War. The enemy of the world. Enemy of all under heaven. And it is even some of the Qin statesmen realize we are so different. It is not because they originally were different. Identities can be changed. You can not just enter the great Chinese nation, you can exit the great Chinese nation under certain circumstances, and then you can re-enter, as we shall see. There is no fixed nationality. I hope very much that most of us agree that nationalities are constructs, and your feeling of identity and collective identity change. Now, Qin and the state of Chu and some other political entities, which were part of the Zhou realm of this uniform culture, they are now moving outside. And here is the question: why China did not disintegrate, it did not become this kind of nation states, of the Commonwealth of nation states like we have in Europe. Why not? What stemmed this disintegration? Which social group? You can write in chat and I will read it later, because we don't have time to have a real discussion, unfortunately. But think about it. Why China's trajectory was so much different from the trajectory of Europe, of modern Europe? And I think the answer is one single word: Shi, or men of service, or translated sometimes as intellectuals. This group, which created a miracle amid this separation, amid alienation, amid creation of separate identities, amid this bloodshed, we have a group, and now I'm sure that most of my viewers are intellectuals, so you can be proud that sometimes intellectuals can create something good or bad. It depends on your political view, but surely create something very powerful by their ideas. And this is what I am going to move now to: the formation of the ideology of great unity, the ideology which actually preceded the imperial formation in China and made China into China. This ideology was, as I already mentioned, was not existent neither in the Western Zhou period. You have some seeds, some segments which will be utilized later, but no. In the springs and autumns period, and you will have to trust me because I think that I worked for many years on the major historical text of this period, the Zhouzhuan, There is no single word in Zhanguo speaking about the great unity. Let us unify. No, people knew it is impossible. Let us create a viable interstate system, but the system was not created, and they had to accept this unpleasant reality. And then we go into the warring states period, and we have all of a sudden explosion. And this explosion, you know, this is the most creative era in Chinese intellectual history, well until today, and I'm afraid that well until tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Actually, it is maybe one of the most, if not the most creative era in political thought in any part of the globe. It is completely amazing, the richness of ideas, but beyond this rich, or beneath this richness, beneath this heterogeneity of ideas, we have some common ideas, of which the great unity of all under heaven is the major common denominator. I give here you just a sample of major thinkers, but believe me, you really can believe me, and I published it, so you can read. It is so easy to pile citations from dozens of texts. So Confucius, the earliest and the most famous of these thinkers, he says, when the way prevails under heaven, rites, music, and punitive expeditions are issued by the Son of Heaven. When there is no way, rites, music, and punitive expeditions are issued by regional lords. Remember, by his time, the Son of Heaven, the Zhou Son of Heaven, was a nullity. He was a non-entity. He was completely a weakling. Confucius does not speak about today's Son of Heaven. He speaks about theoretical Son of Heaven, about the one who will come and reunify the realm. And you have in Mozi, you have it even in Lao Tzu, which is not always identified as part of this discourse. But yes, the monarch, the king, the real king, the true monarch, one is the counterpart of the way heaven and earth. He's only one monarch. And the most important, of course, I think, text which encapsulates this very easily is Mengzi. I am not a fan of Mengzi. Sorry, I know that now I made a lot of enemies in the audience. I don't think that Mengzi is a great political thinker, but he's very nice, very, very impressive personality. Sometimes he has very good ideas. At once he is asked by the king how to stabilize all under heaven, and he answers these three Chinese characters, Jing Yui, stability is in unity. This is the reply. But now, those who dislike my presentation, and they're completely justified to dislike it, they say, ah, come on, you are manipulating. You know, when we have a large corpus of text, and you take this large corpus of text and you mine it for whatever, you can take it with the Jewish tradition, with the Islamic tradition, with the Greek thought, or with the Indian tradition, and you want to find a few sentences which fit your preconceived conclusion, you will find, because if you really work hard, you will find something. But it is not just about these citations. It is too easy for me to make the citations. Look, we have now text, including newly discovered texts, which create these narratives of the past, and they create fictitious unity in the past as if China was forever unified, which was not. And we have the language of unity. The true monarch is only the one who is able to unify all under heaven. And we have discussions and a lot strong, not unanimous, but strong quest for truly universal, not only China limited unity, but unity of real, all under heaven. Whatever we know must be unified, but all this is not important. What is really important for me, that until now, and I hope that after some 30 plus years, which I am reading this text, I'm supposed to have read most of them, including the newly discovered and including the transmitted text, I did not find a single text that say, we want to preserve independence of the state of Han, or the state of Zhao, or the state of Chu, or of the state of Yan. Nothing. There is not a single voice. Let us preserve our independence. The value is not of independence. We want, of course, we don't want to be conquered, surely. But nobody says, let us forever divide this all under heaven and create a viable system of different states, and we shall preserve only our own independence and don't care about all the rest. Not a single voice. Isn't it amazing? And I always wonder why, because it is really surprising. We did not have back then a party line. We did not have uniform political orthodoxy. We did not have uniform ideological orthodoxy. You could say whatever you want. Zhanguo was against everything, against political entities at all. Professor Zhang had written excellently, actually, about Zhanguo, and I recommend very much to read about this very, very unique thinker. So why no voices about independence? Here, I think there are three explanations which I can offer, but of course, many of you may offer different explanations. One of them is the understanding that there is simply no alternative. There is simply no alternative because you cannot preserve your independence in the world in turmoil. This is excellent summary in Liu Shichunqiu. When all under heaven is in turmoil, no state can be ruled well. I think that every of us now, after the pandemic, realize, and unfortunately, we are heading now into even more challenging period. Unfortunately, I am afraid. And I'm afraid that all of us will realize when all under heaven is in turmoil, no state can be ruled well. You cannot preserve your nice villa in the jungle. When there is jungle, you need to address the existence of the jungle. Now, this is an idealistic explanation, but I have, of course, the cynical explanation because I'm working on the Fadia tradition and Han Feizi, who is very cynical. You know, all these guys, all these intellectuals, they were moving from one state to another, and their working pattern was to go from one political entity to another, just like we today move from one university to another. And some people are now speaking about the new cosmopolitans, the frequent flyer cosmopolitans. So we are the frequent flyer cosmopolitans. We can work today in Rutgers, tomorrow in Beijing, and the day after tomorrow in Australia, and then going back to Shanghai or whatever. So the intellectuals back then, they did not belong to a single state. They moved freely from Qin to Chu, to Yan, to Zhao, to Wei. And of course, they had this universal cosmopolitan outlook. This is one explanation, and another also cynical explanation, because it was a kind of the status symbol. You are intellectual, you are an independent intellectual, and you deride all these local customs. China did not have Herder and did not have Mazzini. Nobody who would validate local customs and local folklore. No. When you say this word su, customs, it is a pejorative term. Nobody says it is a very good. When you say about somebody that he is suru, it is vulgar, it is not a real Confucian, it is something which we don't want to respect. The nobleman, the Junzi, is the one who is dedicated to all under heaven, not to a single state, never to a single state. And these ideas create realities on the ground. No, unfortunately, I would like very much to end on the positive saying that these intellectuals convinced everybody to have unity. No, intellectuals cannot convince everybody, or they can convince that we need unity, but they cannot create this unity. For this, you need armies. And these armies were raised by the state of Qin, the notorious state, which we have discussed, but actually a very interesting, fascinating political entity. And then we have this unity. And then the real story begins again, because this hated state, when it unified all under heaven, when it imposed its will on all the competing states, it spoke all the time, we brought peace. You go to the market back then, and you have the uniform weights created in the imperial workshops, and each weight is inscribed. In the 26th year, the emperor completely annexed all the regional lords under heaven. The black-haired people, the commoners, are greatly at peace. Ah, hail the emperor. And we have these steel inscriptions, which Martin Karen has a brilliant book, which I really very much recommend everybody to read, about these stele inscriptions. And One of them is saying, yes, before the emperor, there was bloodshed and for the campaigns were daily waged and they shed their blood in the open countryside and nobody could prohibit it. But now the August Thearch, the emperor, has unified all under heaven into one family. Warfare will never rise again. Ah, so nice, so great propaganda. The past was awful, the present is great, and the future is ours. The end of history, Messiah had come. Now we know very well that the history did not end. The Qin Empire disintegrated in just a few years after the death of the first emperor, was destroyed by the popular uprising of unprecedented ferocity. But even after it was destroyed, and one of the great thinkers of the subsequent empire, Jia Yi of the Han Empire, he criticized Qin, but he said, when Qin unified the world, the men of service docilely bowed before the emperor's wind. Why? The state was so much hated, but after Qin faced south and ruled all under heaven, this meant that there is a son of heaven above. This meant that there was a peace for everybody, peace and security. And ladies and gentlemen, yes, huge price. Yes, bloody wars. But with all, we know that all this propaganda is not entirely correct, but it is very much true that unified empire ensured peace and security to much larger swaths of Chinese population than would be ever possible otherwise. And this is historical truth, unless you want to convince me otherwise, but we shall have a Q&A in some 5 to 10 minutes. Now, in summary, and then a few words of the afterwards. First of all, the Chinese empire is unique among all the empires of which I have any idea. In all the empires, whatever, the Roman Empire, the Caliphate, the Achaemenid Empire, whatever, you first create an empire and then you create an ideology which explains why we unified all these territories or why we rule all these territories under our control. And sometimes it takes a lot of time from the moment you conquer to the moment you have any idea. The Qin emperor was not creating a new ideology. He inherited the ideology which validated the empire long before this empire came into existence. It became the singularly powerful ideological construct which allowed the first emperor to succeed despite all this immense hatred of Qin. And it was not only valid back then. The people understood there were many periods of disintegration and fragmentation, and each of these periods was accompanied by awful bloodshed. There were attempts to create coexistence of competing regimes, but it was impossible because whenever you have fragmentation, everybody knows if I accept my role as a regional king only and not a unified emperor, then I just wait until somebody more powerful will say, okay, now I am powerful enough to conquer you. So if I don't want to be conquered, I need to conquer the rest. The zero-sum game. When China is divided, there is a zero-sum game from which only one competitor will emerge. You can see it very much on this without much discussion. But when we have this disintegration, China fragmenting into a dozen of powerful political entities which can exist separately. But no, they never think about existing separately. They go to war, they kill each other until only one emerges, because you cannot forever be a legitimate ruler if you at least do not aspire to unification. And if you aspire to unification, it means that sooner or later you will go to war the moment that the enemy will be weaker, the moment you have an opportune situation, and then, of course, it is war of extermination, war of all against all. All starts again, and then we know stability is in unity. And number two, the power of this ideological construct of unity was so unbelievably powerful that even when China was conquered, the moment the conquerors at least manifested somehow commitment to this ideal of unity, it worked for them. you can go now to this museum in Gansu, near the city of Wubei, and they have the museum of dedicated to an event in the history of the Mongol Empire, and they present the Mongol Empire in this way. You know, I was born, as I have mentioned, in Ukraine, in Kiev, which was destroyed by the Mongol armies by Batu Khan. And let me say, the people of Kiev until now don't have very pleasant memories, even though it was already 800 years ago. And my neighbors here from Baghdad also don't have very pleasant memories from the Mongol conquest, although we know that this conquest was not as devastating as myths speak, but it was sufficiently devastating to have bad memory. Now, Mongols were also very much an aggressive force in China, but when you see the presentation of Mongol conquest, it is not conquest. It is unification. Before the Mongols, we had 7 different political entities on Chinese soil, and now Mongols came and created the unified empire. Wow, long live the Mongols. It is an official party line. Now you will say, okay, these communists play with history, we know, but go to the history of the Mongol Empire, to the Yuanshi, written by the subsequent ethnic Chinese Ming dynasty, and read how they hail Kublai Khan, who conquered the last Chinese political entity, the Southern Song. He is not a conqueror, he's a unifier. It is really very peculiar to China, and I think that it is something which really deserves utmost attention, because I don't think that anywhere in the world you have this kind of, okay, you unified us, even if you are not one of us, now you become one of us, even though Mongols actually were a very discriminatory regime against the Han majority. Even they did not use Han majority for the most of Chinese, they were Nan-Manzi, the southern barbarians, but and Han were a different designation. But despite these discriminatory policies, they remained legitimate. And by the end of the imperial period, the greatest, the most intelligent emperor in Chinese history, I think the single most intelligent ruler in Chinese history, the Yongzheng emperor, he said in the polemics with a dissenting Chinese subject, unity of the central lands began with Qin, unity beyond the border passes began with the Mongols and peaked under our dynasty. Never before Chinese and foreigners were one family, and the country was so expansive as under our dynasty. Legitimacy derives from unification, and stability is in unity. And on this happy note, having the world as one family, thank you very much, and I am open for your questions and disagreement, and please be free to disagree with everything. You know, I'm coming from Israeli universities in which people never agree about anything, so it's nice for us to have a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was such a rich presentation. I'm sure there will be lots of questions. So you can either put your question in the chat room. I can read it out for you, or you can use the raise hand function, you know, at the bottom of the Zoom meeting. We have the first question from Zoe Lin. So the question is, can you please elaborate on what you call Zhou idea of exclusive Son of Heaven, but no real quest for effective unification, especially what exactly is exclusive about the Zhou idea of unification?
Yes, thank you very much. A very important question. The exclusiveness is the appellation of the Son of Heaven. The Zhou Sons of Heaven, their official title was Wang, king, which was also supposed to be in their exceptional possession, but there were many polities, especially in southern China, but not only in southern China. We know now from bronze inscriptions that there were several polities which the rulers of which accepted the title of king, Wang. And later, in the later period, in the Eastern Zhou period, after the collapse of Western Zhou, much more rulers accepted this title of Wang, of king. However, well until the end of the Zhou dynasty, well until the Qin unification, and even after the Qin unification, this idea that there is only one son of heaven, and it is only the Zhou king who is allowed to call himself Tianzi. It remained an exclusive possession of these Zhou kings. They never, there were never two sons of heaven. That is a statement attributed to Confucius. No two sons of heaven, no two heavens on and no two kings on earth. It reflects this situation that there was only one legitimate ruler, only one. It is just like you don't have two popes. When you have two popes, it is of course a great schism in the church and a great struggle for Catholics, but normally you don't have two popes. You don't have two caliphs. If you don't have two caliphs, it becomes a great problem for the Muslims. You can have only one person, and in Catholic Church it's more powerful than in Islamic history. And Zhou was very much closer to the Catholic Church, only single son of heaven. Now, when I speak about unification of Zhou, Zhou knew very well that there are actually not far away, but very close to the Zhou heartland, there were entities inhabited by people who were not belonging to the Zhou king, who were sometimes under certain, let me say, allies or not allies or enemies, but Zhou did not plan to conquer them. Some of them, yes, and some of them not. And the Zhou were, they just got used that there are political entities outside our reach. They tried at the beginning to expand, and then by the 10th century, the expansion actually stopped completely. They remained the cultural center of the universe, but not like the Qin, which really wanted to conquer wherever you can, well into Vietnam.
Thank you very much. So next one we have Tsukai Chu. If you can unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you, Professor Pines. Thank you so much. I hear from your presentation the energy you have in your writing. It's extraordinary. I have not a question, but just a thought I want to consider. And the comment is, what is the intellectual basis for this 天下一家? What is really it cannot just come out like that. There is an intellectual basis. And here I'm proposing, and I welcome your comment, that it's I Ching. And in particular, in I Ching, the central thought is 天人合一. So I think it's the unity of the heavens or the celestial and the earthlings. And that forms the knowledge of unity. And I think this, would you consider it's really the intellectual basis for what's the entire thing of 大一统?
Thank you very much. It is a very nice suggestion. And I think it's not only Yijing, of course, there are a lot of ideas circulating, and Yijing also part of this greater discourse which speaks about the unity. I think that the commentatory parts of Yijing are quite late. They are from the late Warring States period. And the earlier parts of Yijing, they don't have very clearly pronounced political ideology. But what I think that this ideology is one of the explanatory frameworks offered to have this Daitong. Yes, it is very easy to have the metaphysical stipulations of unity. I think Lao Tzu actually is, for me, is the beginning, the real beginning of this idea that you have one Tao, one heaven, one earth, and one monarch. It is very strongly pronounced in Lao Tzu, and we have a huge amount of texts, not only the Yijing, but you are absolutely right. Yijing is a very important. In the imperial era, it will become the most important for this validation of unity. But I would not say that everybody in the Warring States period was very much interested in these metaphysical stipulations. I will say my good friend, who is hated by everybody, Lord Shang Yang, he never spoke about anything about heaven and about earth. He spoke, yes, we need to, you want to put an end to war, just conquer everybody and there will be no war. So simple, so cruel, and actually so effective. It's frightening. So you're very right philosophically, but practically not everybody's accepted this idea.
Thank you.
So next one we have KY Chen.
Hi, Yuri. How are you?
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very nice talk. I learned a lot. And then I have 2 points that is I like to hear what you say. One is you talk about continuity. Then easily people would, I would think about the late Zhang Guangzhi, his model, that is a Sino-Maya model of continuity. So that actually probably also plays some role in what you proposed. Another thing is I think writing, the Chinese writing, the uniqueness of Chinese writing in terms of continuity, because all the other writings, the spelling writing, that is, they move away from the original logographic writing, except Chinese. And then actually, during the warring state period, I think there is a tendency, in other words, to start the spelling. And so in that sense, that is Qin Shi Huang, he played a great role in terms of setting the stage for the next 2,000 years of continuity, because otherwise, if it continued to go on, I think there will be different writing system in different state. And that is why I think one of his first business is to standardize writing and then actually, spread it all over. And then all the official, everybody will have to use one kind of writing. So I'd like to hear what you say.
Thank you very much. First of all, I completely agree with the importance of writing and the Chinese writing, but I want to caution, I know that all those who speak about the writing as a unifying thread of China, they think about the classical example. There was a Latin as a common language, lingua franca of Europe, and then all these vulgar jargons, which are called now the German and French and Spanish and Italian and English, etc. They started writing in their own language, and then we have disintegration of the unified European realm into different component cultures and polities, etc. And then, of course, China is a great alternative. But I would like to give you an example of unified language, which without logographs, with still normally letters, which continues unity for at least 15 centuries without any problem, the Arabic. The Arab world, the literally Arabic is the same from Iraq to Morocco. The pronunciation a little bit different, but really a little bit different. You can grasp the differences of pronunciation in half a day, all the different dialects. So how you pronounce this letter or another. And still the unity of the Arabic language, which is remarkable, the huge realm which still uses the same language, the same official pronunciation, like the Chinese Putonghua. And it is not politically unified. Political unity does not derive from cultural unity. Cultural unity is very important precondition, but it facilitates greatly political unity for sure, but it does not create by itself political unity. And this is what I think from actually, many people believe that I started working on Dai Tong idea because of China, Taiwan, whatever, but no, I started because of the Arab world, because 30 years ago, Saddam Hussein raised the idea of unification of the Arab world, and there was a lot of people who were very much interested, and then I became fascinated with why the Arab world failed to unify, whereas China succeeded. So for me, this is an example. And for your first question, very briefly, I completely agree with you, of course, about continuities. But because I wrote a lot about continuities, there are a lot of colleagues who hate this word, and they always accuse me of serving the Chinese Communist Party of China by emphasizing the continuities. And then I tell, but sorry, my actual research is about ruptures. My research are about the springs and autumns and the Warring States period, when everything was not the same, but there were dramatic changes, and the truth of yesterday became completely irrelevant today. And this is what I am working on. So I like ruptures no less than I like continuities. And I think that to be good historians, we need to take into consideration both of them. That is why it is fascinating.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Yuri.
Thank you.
Thank you. So next question, we have Elizabeth Childs Johnson.
So what do I do?
Oh, you just unmuted yourself. You were, yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, just ask your question.
Yuri, hi. I'm glad to see you and hear your eloquent and dynamic talk. Thanks very much. But, you know, I have certain differences with you, and I want to make sure you understand them. You talk about cultural, unified culture does not create an empire. That has been a strong point of yours throughout your talk and throughout many of your publications. And you need political software. I agree on that. I totally agree with the idea you need political software. However, unified culture is something, as an archaeo-art historian, I can not totally agree with you that it's just, you know, a political construct or concept. I mean, because what you see happening in China is that you have to consider what goes on before the Zhou. I mean, the Shang led to the Zhou, and the late Neolithic led to the Shang, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a total continuity all the way up through 1911 or 2022. And I don't think you can just eliminate this concept of cultural continuity. John Major and I are just about to publish this book called Metamorphic Imagery in Early Chinese Art and Religion. And in that particular, you know, spread, we go through late Neolithic through the, not through Han, through the Warring States period. And the cultural continuity is so strikingly obvious in terms of a belief in metamorphic imagery or metamorphism, beginning with the writing of Shang. I don't think you can eliminate Shang so easily, because that—
I don't eliminate.
And I know you don't, and I know you don't, because we've talked about this to a certain extent. But I do think that the concept of one under heaven begins with Shang. So what's your comment?
let me say, first of all, I completely don't try to undermine the importance of cultural continuities. They are very obvious, and they surely facilitate unification. But we have seen the state of Qin and the state of Zhou were the same culture in the 5th century BC. 6th century BC, nobody would say that they are barbarians. In the 4th century BC, a lot of people, they say they are barbarians. Why? Despite common cultural continuity, they tried to somehow distinguish themselves from the rest. And even culturally, there were attempts, not very serious, but still attempts to develop different styles or different maybe regional identities. I think it is all negotiable. What I say, I accept that culture is very important. What I don't want to accept is cultural determinism, because some people say, okay, we have the jade culture from the Neolithic period, which continues through the centuries well into today. You know, people in China are buying jade even today, even more hotly than they were doing this in the last four millennia or 5 millennia. Yes, but does it create political realities? Here, I beg to disagree. I think it facilitates creation of, say, certain political realities, sure. It is easier when you have common culture. But common culture is also a product of the common state. You know, the fact that China for 22 centuries, people were reading the five classics, and nobody reads them today, of course. How many people read the Chuncio? You know, here we have a lot of professors. I can ask How many of you have read the Chunxiu, which was the must for any educated Chinese back then? So culture is a factor, but it is not the factor, let me say.
Well, can I just respond to that quickly? Well, Yuri, what I think is that the political structure and religious structure, or whatever we'll call it, belief, because Xinjiang was really, absolute, dead on beginning of the whole Chinese tradition that lasts up to today. I don't think you can separate the concept of one under heaven or son of heaven and what went on before the Zhou period that formulated that concept. That's my point. And because as an archaeo-art historian, I see there's so much continuity in terms of what goes on, whether it's what I formulated with the concept of a Jade Age or later. I think that the material culture is just, it's not a liar. You look at it and you can follow it and trace it. And I think, anyway, so my point is like Tian and Di, they originate they have a common source of belief in political culture as well as belief. Anyway, so I just wanted to throw that out, and I don't. I really enjoy all of your work. It's been absolutely super, and but I tend to look at material culture in a much more centralized way. Is that okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So next question is from Wenxuan Sheng. So the question is, Jacques Maritain once contended that unity of culture lies in a common philosophical structure. A Lebanese philosopher, Allen, borrows this view to contend that there is a need for developing a new universal philosophical structure, metaphysics, for a sense of bonding across cultures and civilizations. Do you think that there is a common philosophical structure as the basis for the unity ideology in Chinese culture? Do you think that the Chinese philosophy could continue to contribute to a possible universal philosophical structure to promote unity across cultures and civilizations? That's an easy question. So.
It is a tough question. It is for you. Professor Zhang can answer much better than myself. You are a philosopher, not myself. I'm just a historian. I'm not just a historian. I'm a historian who worked a lot on philosophers who hated philosophers, or philosophers who hated those who speak a lot about philosophy. My good friend Shang Yang and another good friend Han Fei, they derided all those empty talkers who just go from one place to another and talk about philosophy. They said we need something practical, which was, of course, a little bit ridiculous because they were philosophers by themselves, but they were class traitors, as I call it in my other talk. I'm not in a position to judge whether it is possible or not to create world philosophy. I am living in a very small city of Jerusalem, which is divided into nominally 3 major religions, but actually into 24 religious interpretations. All of them believe in the same God, but they completely disagree about anything, and they fight each other despite very common philosophical foundations of their perception. All of them believe in the same biblical story. So I'm not sure that philosophy by itself can create a good world. It is maybe a very nice superstructure, but it is very sad. I would like to say that yes, I believe that good, nice ideas will create something very fascinating, new, uniform, and we shall have the good world without wars and without oppression and without climatic collisions, etc. But unfortunately, as I told you, in 2022, it is the most pessimistic year in my life, and I cannot say that I believe that philosophy can save the world. I think that unfortunately, sometimes you need also the armies and bad guys and tough guys and suppression, because sometimes things don't work just by suasion. maybe because I'm too much engaged with Shenyang and Hanfei, maybe I shall move to Zhuangzi and or at least to Mengzi, and then I will be more optimistic. But my both scholarship and personal experience, and of course living in the Middle East, does not make you optimistic by default. So, sorry.
Thank you. That was a very honest answer. So next question is by Avidal Ron. So the question is about the relationship of the unifier of the past. While throughout Chinese history, the often typified as Confucian, quote unquote, desire to return to a glorified past was a recurring intellectual theme, it seems like a more complex approach towards the past, which includes embracing but also amending and changing it, is the one that come in handy. This resonates with Qin Shi Huang's stele and also visible in Lü Shi Chunqiu and Huainan Zi. Can we point at a relationship with the past as a factor in a successful imperial unification?
Yes, a great question, Avital. It is a fascinating question because there were two approaches. There was a major approach that we want to have unity in the future, so we create unity in the past. We imagine, or not only imagine, because Becky had just reminded us very nicely, the Shang was an important political entity with surely towering presence above any other regional culture. So you could very easily imagine it as an empire of the past. And you could imagine Western Zhou as an empire of the past, and you could continue it back into the past, into the mythological past, into the Yellow Thearch and Yao and Shun, etc. And we have these attempts. And it was very convenient to say, yes, because there was unity in the past, there must be unity in the present. And it is, some people ridicule it as a kind of Chinese argument that if we have a precedent, then it must be so. But what is funny about the Warring States period, that there were people who were very consciously against this tendency to glorify the past, because they felt, and they were actually, at least Hanfei was an excellent historian. I think that I really don't want to waste a few years, but if you have doctoral students who want to make a study about Hanfei as a historian, I really would like to guide him or co-supervise him because of her, because it can be a fascinating topic. Hanfei realized very well, no, the past was not as good as it is. We want to create something new, something much better. And this was a kind of intellectual atmosphere by the Warring States period. Kai Vogelsang had written in the future volume, you will see, about this new ideology of the present, which, like Schiller, who says, everything which was in the past, it was the past. Now we have a new world. And we have it with Shenyang, we have it with Hanfei, and we have it in many other texts. We are now living in qualitatively new world, and we need to create something new, more powerful, more convincing, more effective. And Qin Shi Huang inherits it. They say, okay, yes, these poor Zhou people, sometimes the regional lords were coming to their court, and sometimes they were not coming to their court. And the Son of Heaven was completely incapable of enforcing their coming. In my case, nobody will say no, because sorry, it will be the last answer the person can give to me. So this is, you don't need past for this, you need present. But later, of course, from the Han Dynasty on, there was a great turn back to the past, because it became much more easy to invent the past, to imagine the past, to create the past which will fit exactly the needs of the currently unified empire. The idea of the novelty, it don't disappear completely, but it was sidelined well until the 20th century, actually.
Thank you. Next question is by Alvin Young. The question is, were there any competing visions of world order to the grand unity or Tianxia vision in ancient China?
Well, I would like to see the competing vision, which will say we want to have the fragmented world. But until now, as I told, I have not discovered this. I have not discovered anybody who says, okay, fragmentation is good, or independence of whatever. We can say Zhuangzi is an alternative. Yes, Zhuangzi is an alternative vision because you don't have any philosophical right to coerce me, because who gives you the right to coerce on me your truth? Because you understand your own truth, I have my own truth, and nobody can convince each other in any case. But it is Zhuangzi. It's a very powerful antidote to totalitarianism. It is very good to have Zhuangzi because then you can avoid totalitarian nightmares, but you cannot create political realm with Zhuangzi, unfortunately, although Professor Yang had some good ideas, mixing all of them into something completely new, but it will be your project to create a new world in which Hanfei and Zhuangzi can coexist. I'm incapable of doing so. I don't think there was a convincing alternative. There were ideas of how this integration should take place, whether it should be uniform or multiplicity of cultures will be maintained under integration. Of course, there was a lot of debate. And Liu Shichunxiu, for instance, the idea that all the ideas are good, just they can be used in certain circumstances, in certain periods of time, but not all of them are. Each of them has something valid. It's a very nice idea of more lenient integration, not forceful integration. These debates were, of course, very strongly pronounced, but there was no idea that we don't need unity. There was only idea which unity. Well, do we need uniformity? Yes, about uniformity, there was a lot of debate. We don't need uniformity because the world is yin and yang, and there are 5 elements, and we cannot create absolute uniformity. Uniformity will not work. This was quite a powerful current of thought, maybe the dominant current of thought. But still, we have unity, not uniformity.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions. We have Lei Hua Wen, if you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pine. I really like your speech, your lecture. And I thank you for showing to us in your lecture those quotes from the intellectuals, the Shi intellectuals. They were arguing for the unification as the only solution to achieve peace and to end the war. I think there should be something more than the interstate political status. I think there should be something deeper. So why unification was the only solution to end the wars they were experiencing, they were witnessing? And I think there were at least 2 types of wars if we group them. One is the wars with the nomadic people in the north and in the west. In the bad years, they may invade and to loot. Those groups may not need hydraulic projects, and also there were wars between the different domains. They were competing for the water and other natural resources to stay agricultural. So the first type of war, I think it had a lot to do with the lifestyle. Nomadic lifestyle came and go, and the other is agricultural. That requires settlement in the land. And I think the arguments came up with those early intellectuals. The intellectuals during the warring states may think that only unification would strengthen the agricultural societies to defend themselves. And also, unification could organize people as a big society to do hydraulic projects. So I kind of I'm defending the theory you came up with, even though I haven't read the hydraulic theory yet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You made the question, which gives me a lot of opportunity to reply. Actually, your arguments are very close to the arguments of Professor Zhu Suli or Suli from PKU, who wrote this book about Constitution of Early China. But I am sorry, this is one of the points on which history and archaeology proves that the theory is completely wrong. Why? There were no nomads as a political force in China before the Qin unification. Actually, during the Warring States period and pre-Warring States period, there were agro-pastoral people in the fringes of, usually in the hills of Shanxi, for instance. You don't need to go to Mongolia. In the hills of Huai River, there were a lot of agro-pastoral people. They were not completely agricultural, but not nomads. The nomads entered Chinese history very, very late. They entered not because they wanted to enter Chinese history, because China entered their realm, because the first emperor of Qin, when he unified all under heaven, one of his projects was to expand to the north, and then he unsettled the ancestors of who are named Xiongnu, and they became known as Xiongnu, and they had to reorganize. And there is a very lot of research about this. I think the best is Professor Nicola Di Cosmo's great book, Ancient China and Its Enemies, but also myself a little bit, and Paul Goldin and many other scholars were writing about this. The nomads are the creation of Chinese empire, the problem of Chinese empire. And in the imperial period, you are completely right. Yes, having a powerful army to combat the nomads, yes, it is important. But in the Warring States period, just search all the corpus of the Warring States texts and search for the word Xiongnu. You will find twice, I think. It is completely marginal. They were non-entity. Even these cultural groups, which were non-Semitic cultural groups, the Ji and the Yi and the Man and the Rong, which in the springs and autumns period were incursing into the Central Plains. By the Warring States period, they were already completely subjugated or disappearing. They became meaningless. The real war which mattered was not the war with the external enemy. It was the war with our brethren who became our real enemies. The war was to unify, not to protect ourselves against the external threat. And this is, I think, a very peculiar Chinese way, because Chinese wanted unity not against somebody else, but for peace and stability within our realm, because only other Chinese polities were powerful enough to devastate you. You know, the nomads, even later, okay, there is a nomadic incursion, they will kill a lot of people, they will loot a lot, but it is incomparable in terms of destruction than the war between the polity to the south of Huai River and to the north of Huai River, who will fight in agricultural heartland, who will destroy incomparably more lives, because they are fighting in the center and not on the fringes of the empire, but in its heartland. And the unity we need against ourselves, not against somebody else.
Thank you. Zoe, do you want to ask your question? Zoe Lin, I saw you unraise your hand, so I'm not sure whether you want to raise it. And we have another one who just put Jonathan Hui, who put the question in the chat room. Are there any lesson in Lord Shang or Han Fei for contemporary global order that don't end in military conquest? I fielded a recent question at a conference in the so-called the Thucydides trap, which suggests the problem of hegemon and challengers ends in military conflict. So I'm interested in alternative to this outside the Confucian tradition. I don't know whether you want to comment on that.
I'm afraid that the answer will not be very nice, because you opted for two guys who are very, very clearly saying, okay, you want peace, prepare the good army, conquer the enemy, and then the enemy will never threaten you again. There is no, according to both Shang Yang and Han Fei, there are no ways of peaceful coexistence. Han Fei actually, because he was from a small state of Han, and he had some good ideas what you need to be to avoid being conquered in the first place. Avoid being conquered in the first place, I will translate it into modern language. Have enough of nuclear bombs, and then everybody will respect you immediately. You know, my poor motherland of Ukraine gave up its huge nuclear arsenal in exchange for the promises from Russia, United Kingdom, and the United States that Ukrainian territorial integrity, etc., will forever be preserved. And we see exactly what happens. So I'm sorry, I know that I'm speaking against the common trend of nuclear non-proliferation. I'm afraid that the better world will be when according to Han Fei, not according to myself, but you asked about Han Fei. Han Fei will say, let everybody has a good arsenal of nukes, and then we shall see who will dare to attack you.
Mutually assured destruction, right? On a global scale, multi-level, not just between the East and West. Okay, Joey Lin, if you can put your question very quickly, unmute yourself and very quickly, so then I think we can, yeah, we have a couple of minutes. Go ahead.
Sure, thank you. My camera is not quite working. Sorry, I can't turn it on. So my question is the idea, the intellectual or Shi's idea, the unification or unity ideology, where did it come from? Like more specifically, like their idea about unification is not going back to the Zhou, but an imagined or even expanded version of unification. So where did that come from? Zhou never unified all under heaven, right? Not the South, but the Qing conquered the South. So the whole unification model or ideology, where did it come from? Thank you.
You see, for some of them, of course, it was very easy to imagine Zhou as if they conquered the South. You can see in the Han Dynasty, it was very clear for them that Zhou conquered Yueshang. Yueshang actually was a small polity in Shandong, but it was imagined now as Vietnamese polity. So the people came with two translators because they were so far removed that it was impossible to translate from one language to another. So you translate in two stages. You can imagine anything about Zhou and about Shang, and there are debates. In Xunzi, you have a very strong debate. People say Zhou and Shang were not good enough in unification because they could not enforce themselves on Wu and Yue on Southeast. And Xunzi doesn't like this idea. He says, no, they were good enough. They were excellent. They unified everybody. It was a type of debate. Zhou was very important, and before them, of course, Shang is an example that there is a single powerful locus of authority. In the good years of Zhou, in the beginning of the Zhou, it was very clear that Son of Heaven is really at least the hegemon of the entire known world. He is the most powerful person in the realm, and this was very important for the emergence of the idea of unity in the beginning of the Warring States period. And later then people realized we don't need this kind of unity, we need much better unity, much stronger unity. This is Shang Yang and then Han Fei, etc. But they already were based on the preconceived unity, which is rooted in the imagination of what Zhou was. It is not necessarily what Zhou really was, but it was what we imagine. How we imagine the Roman Empire is much more important for today than what Roman Empire really was. So sometimes imagination, not to speak about religious imagination, it is much more important than the facts about whatever origins, etc.
Thank you. Just a side comment. The unification actually means expansion, right?
Of course. But it is for another talk, because the most interesting aspect that you started the expansion, and then the first emperor, the one who said that wherever human traces reach, everybody became my subject, the same emperor erects the new Great Wall, saying, I will not go farther to the north. And I visited this wall in near Baotou, to the north of Baotou. Very impressive. even then you say there are limits to expansion, but it is a completely different topic, maybe for one future talk.